Hello and welcome to another Not Chilli Podcast. Today, on episode 18, we have Josh yet again, and we're talking about the TV show M.A.S.H. Now, we're talking about this show in preparation for a series of short episodes of some of the best moments that we like in M.A.S.H. And to be honest, this episode is a great example of how much Josh loves M.A.S.H. as a TV show. I was flicking through it and I noticed that it was mostly him talking about all these amazing moments of the TV show. And it's just a testament of how much knowledge he has about it, and I'm certainly running off the back of himself. And how good of a TV show, considering how much you can talk about and how many layers you can get into it. Anyway, sit back and enjoy, and thank you very much for being a part of this.
All I have to say, PR.
Yes,
Josh. Through the early morning fog I see visions of the things to be, the pain that are withheld from me. I realize and I can see that suicide is painless. It brings on many changes.
I'm gonna let you do this.
And I can take or leave it if I please.
I wonder what Josh is talking about.
The greatest show of all time.
Do you think so?
No, there is no greatest show of all time.
What do you think
it's just a fucking amazing show.
Yeah, right.
Oh, it is definitely one of the greatest shows of all time. Like, if you take all the shit that's in it that is to do with its time.
Yeah.
Totally.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Like, racism.
Sexism.
A huge portion of the sexism is referring to the 50s.
Oh, no, that's my point, is that it's still...
The racism is of the 70s.
Oh, I see what you're getting at.
You know, we need Korean people. Let's cast Chinese people.
Oh, right.
Or the same... Like, throughout the series, a lot of the featured Asian extras are the same person.
Yeah. Because who will know the difference, according to the producers?
And that happens with a couple of white people in it. It does.
Yeah,
including
of
Sherman.
Yeah.
Sherman T. Potter.
Oh, that's right. He's in, like, one of the early seasons, the aggressive...
He's in the last episode of season 2, I think.
Yeah.
2 or 3. Pretty sure. No, God, no, of course not.
So that's season so 2. Weird in so many ways. I mean, all of it's weird. I mean, I guess...
He plays a mad general.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I remember that.
Great episode.
Yeah, that's right.
And so was the episode we just watched.
Which, and we should talk about, is we're just going to have a quick-ish podcast about M.A.S.H. Because Josh and I plan to do a couple of more contained series, something we can kind of smash out in a much higher frequency that allows us to have a more stable podcast. And so we're going to do... firstly, an introduction to M.A.S.H. and why we love it. And then we're going to do kind of our favorite episodes and then just go through them. There's so many episodes. We're not going to go sequentially. Yeah, we're just going to miss a bunch and we're just going to pick things out and then just be like, why is this amazing? What made it really cool? And all that business.
Cool.
Yeah, so tell me. Well, this is obviously the intro. Like this is going to be the first episode, the episode that people can be like, oh, this is what they're talking about. So we don't have to... go about every single episode and be like, well, M.A.S.H. is a TV show, which blah, 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 blah. Let's talk about what M.A.S.H. is as a whole and what you love about it.
Being 14 years into my love affair with M.A.S.H.
14 years. You know what? My love affair is like 5 years old. Or, no, probably a little bit more, 6 or so. I'm trying to remember when Laura went overseas. So, tell me about your first experience with M.A.S.H. Other than watching it as a kid when it appeared a couple of times.
To come on.
Yeah, that's right. Like when you actually watched it.
It was when I worked at Top Video, and we had seasons 1, 2, and 3, which are the ones that have Trapper. Sorry, my brain is tired. It has Trapper and Lieutenant Colonel.
Winchester? No, Winchester.
Henry. My brain is going crazy. Anyway, Henry's in it. And, so that's before Trapper leaves. And I had just finished a HSC and I, binged them. And
did you watch all of it, back to back and just, did it take you, a month or something?
Not a month. I don't know, 2 weeks.
Jeez.
Probably
That's pretty
less.
fast.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wasn't really doing anything, and except for partying and getting drunk and shit,
True.
and working in a video store. So I watched it at home and I watched it at work.
Nice.
And yeah, so then about a year and a half later, I was working at Video Easy in Epping, and found out that you could buy anything as a staff member. You could buy it as long as you put the GST on top of the cost price.
And there it is.
Yeah, and so I bought all 11 seasons. 33 DVDs. And it was... I then smashed it in order. Not that it really matters, but smashed it all in order. There are arcs in it. And that was really when I totally fell in love. And it became a show that kind of became part of my DNA, I guess. It's one of my favorite things, whatever type of media you want to absorb. It's one of my favorite things. I think it's a very human show. I think that it's a very honest show. It's a very brave show. It did a lot of, they had to fight so hard to make it what it was before it really took off. In terms of, it took off fairly quickly, but in terms of, the blood, for instance, they initially were never allowed to have, before the show got into production, no one wanted them to have blood. No one wanted them to have any kind of...
There's no blood in war.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. They just sort of went, okay, well, then we can't do this. Like, you have to have this or not. And that's where one of the show's producers was fundamentally important to the whole process. And he's very proud of his efforts on it. And he said his only regret was that he didn't fight harder for a bigger set. And that's kind of it.
So my experience with it was you obviously raved about it, and you told me about it heaps, and then I think the moment I was like, yeah man, maybe I'll check it out, you're like, here, quick, here's 60 gigs worth of of M.A.S.H. I'm like, yeah, just watch it. So
Are you saying that I gave you a pirated copy of M.A.S.H?
No, you have all of M.A.S.H.
I do have all of it, but I do have it digitally backed up because M.A.S.H is, for me personally, I think that I have a need.
And it's for me, Firefly was that same kind of thing. I've got a digital version, but I also have the DVDs for it. And I just watch the digital versions because it's just easier to access and they don't wear and tear the discs.
Totally.
So you threw them at me and I'm like, oh yeah. And then I probably held it for a year or something like that before. Yeah, so my girlfriend went away overseas and I saw I had I think it was a month that she was gone. And I was like, now's the time. And I felt pretty down about it because I'd never had my partner disappear for a long period of time, and so I started watching it and just could not stop. And then once I got past season 2, I was just in tears, on a daily basis whilst drinking a lot. Wow. It was not good because I love booze, and you can imagine watching a show like that where they especially in the earlier seasons where they're just making alcohol, the makeshift alcohol, and constantly drinking. I was just matching them drink for drink, and it was a drunken, sappy mess of a show. And that's probably why I'm so in love with it, because I haven't actually rewatched it. I've been so eager to, but I'm so in love with it because it was it talked about so many amazing topics.
Oh yeah.
But you go. You obviously have a lot more finer detail about all of it.
I think it's the beauty of the show is, a lot of people talk now and when you read people sort of go, oh, it was great when it was funny, and then when Alan Alda got control of it, it was.
What idiots say that?
Tons of people. They think it sort of got too preachy and all that kind of stuff, but the thing is, maybe at the time it may have seemed that way, but when you look back at it now, you go, fucking hell, 1976, 1977, 1980 something, they're making these points on TV about not simple things, really just about self-reflection, about what's right, about mental annihilation, about so many things, and the concept of the character of Hawkeye to me, in terms of what he goes through, he's a character that never quite leaves my thoughts in a lot of ways, because it's one of those things where you go, God, I want to see what happens when he gets home. But I don't think any good. I don't think anything good.
Yeah.
I think that he does not have a pleasant time after the conclusion of the show.
Yeah, right.
I think that the things that he goes through, so he's the only character who is basically there from the beginning to the end. And he is the only, Alan Alda was the only actor who was in every single episode. No one else covered the entire show like that. And because of that, and because of his directing and assisting in the writing and the creative process, he got to the showrunners. They really got to explore a character in such a depth that the concept of a sitcom prior to that would never have allowed that concept. Which is one of the interesting things of the show. Like in the UK and I think in Australia, the laugh track never existed. Definitely in the UK, I'm not 100% sure on Australia. I thought that Australia had the BBC copies, but I'm not sure. But the BBC had never had laugh tracks. So the laugh tracks are on it up until season 6, and then they gradually fade out until at some point in season 8 they disappear.
Yep.
And that was a thing that Alan Alda and a few other people were pushing. And now, so the versions that I have now are stripped of the
laugh track.
the laugh track.
Yeah.
And whereas in America it was like, this is a sitcom, come along. And it very much is, like for seasons 1 and 2 and then going into 3, and they do explore some deeper parts and things like that, but it doesn't get really into complex, dark things until the show really reaches a point where the television stations, the broadcasters can reject it. The show was powerful enough and the creators and stars were powerful enough that they could push an agenda, and they get to explore feminism and racism and ethnicity and the war, obviously, to a very great extent. In a context where you're not seeing horror in an explicit way.
No.
You're seeing allusions to the horrors of war, and yet
or the aftermath.
And yet how powerful is that? And so many profound moments in the show, and some of my favorite parts are just at those lowest, most desperate times that Hawkeye has.
Yeah.
And like what one comes to mind, funnily enough, is actually the first time "son of a bitch" the phrase was ever used on television.
Ooh.
There's this episode where the South Korean military police or military intelligence, I can't quite remember, but they've got a North Korean woman who is like a militia person, and so she comes into the hospital so they can rehabilitate her, and they're rehabilitating her so that the South Koreans can take her, interview her and try and get anything out of her, and then execute her for being a spy. And when Hawkeye realizes that this is what's happening, he tries to get her out. But as they find out through the episode, she tries to kill someone while she's in the hospital. She tries to murder either a South Korean or an American or something like that. And then at the end of the episode, there's this part where she's screaming. They're about to take her to be interviewed and executed. And I'll get to sort of the main point of one of the things that I love about the show in a sec. But the South Korean army officer translates what she is allegedly saying to Hawkeye, which is just basically like, I would kill you if I could, and all this sort of stuff. And it's still, Hawkeye is just saying, you can't just execute a person. Like, you can't just take this person and kill her. And that's just a supremely... He's in war. Like, you're around it all the time, but it's he's being chipped away at all the time.
Yeah.
And, he's like, you can't kill, you son of a bitch. And that's the point at which he realizes that they are going to take her and execute her. And they do take her and execute her. And he's this character that's just chipped away at and chipped away at and chipped away at in big and small ways, to the point that the Hawkeye who goes there in a huge way is not the same person that leaves. And that goes for anyone, particularly in that type of situation. And one of the things that's unique about what they can do with the show was that the mobile army surgeons hospitals have only happened in a single war. It was the only time they've ever existed was during the Korean War. So they were to be at, there's battalion aid, and that's like where the combat happens, and then they get you from there, and they'd either chopper you or ambulance you to a M.A.S.H unit. And there were a bunch of different M.A.S.H units throughout Korea. And the reason is that before that, you kind of had battalion aid, and then you had, whatever the headquarters was in World War II. And after that, the helicopters could fly such a distance and was such a size that they made M.A.S.H units irrelevant, because you could fly people out of the field to a proper hospital. To a proper military hospital. And nowadays, if you get injured, you get like flown off onto, if you get injured in Iraq or whatever, you go to a hospital somewhere in Iraq, and then you get flown to Germany and treated. That's how it. So they don't. It's this one sort of window in time where this crazy concept was at play, and in this particular thing, it's like Hawkeye is this character who is deeply cynical, steadfast in select principles. There are ones that he's terrible with women. He treats women like shit. He is irrational in his need to defy what is happening. He can't accept the situation that he's in. And through that, he manages to hold on to something in himself while sort of every other part of him falls away. And as he says in one of my favorite episodes, where Radar looks up to Hawkeye, like a sort of an older brother or an idol, and Hawkeye gets really, really drunk and then has to leave the OR in the middle of the surgery, and it's the only time in the war in that unit that ever happens in the universe of the show. And that really causes something to disrupt in Radar. He goes, oh my god, he's fallible. He's fallible. And they get into this big argument, and but before that, Hawkeye encourages Radar to go and go to Tokyo
and have
or Seoul
or whatever,
and have R&R and sleep with a girl, become a man kind of stuff. And he gets injured, and Hawkeye feels bad about it. And when he goes to speak to him, Radar gives him shit about being drunk in OR, and he says to him, my job is to pull kids out of a meat grinder without going crazy if possible. And it's one of those moments where you really see just Bear how close to the edge he is. And that was a thing as it went on that Alan Alda wanted to sort of push more and more and more and more and show the disturbed nature of this person. And as a character study of Hawkeye, that's one of my favorite things about the show. Not to say the other characters aren't as interesting to me. My second favorite character by a narrow second is Margaret Houlihan. And she is the other one who's quite similarly tested and looked at. And then BJ would be a close third in terms of who's examined the most, Winchester is as well. He's quite well examined, but he's such a different person that it doesn't quite...
You don't resonate too well. You don't sympathize with as much. You do in some episodes.
You do. I just think that it's more revealing that this person who's an asshole is a decent person fundamentally, whereas
Frank or something was the opposite, right? He was just
Frank's just a piece of shit.
Shit, yeah, that's right.
He's nuts.
Yeah.
You know, and for BJ, it explores things like he cheats on his wife, and what does that do to him? He gets, after Radar goes home, Radar meets his child that he, because of the nature of the show and how shows were made at the time, they didn't quite have continuity the way we do in shows today. So he had a child, and then it's kind of like later on he's never met his child. So going towards the end of the show, it's like he's never met his daughter.
Yep.
And Radar has met his daughter, and he has a massive breakdown over this concept of
I remember this episode. It was really, really,
and it's well done, and it's that thing of, I love that they
was that BJ? I thought it was Honeycutt.
BJ, yeah, BJ Honeycutt.
Oh my god, that's what I'm confused. Who was the guy before?
Trapper.
Trapper
is mentioned actually in that moment. He's like, I hate him. I hate Radar, and I hate Trapper, and I hate everyone that's gone home.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
He says, I hate Trapper, and I've never even met him. Because he hates that he was close to Hawkeye. He hates that he's gone home. He's jealous of him. He's all these different things. And I love that those things don't fade away. They don't forget that there were these characters here.
Yeah,
that comes like later on. That thing. It's like a few episodes after Radar leaves, I think. But there's a lot of... So that's kind of how BJ is explored. He's explored in that type of way. And Winchester is explored in, that sort of... he's an asshole. But there's softness underneath.
Yeah.
But Margaret has the biggest arc. So Hawkeye falls apart, but Margaret has a totally different arc as a human. Being
well, she feels and seems very functional in the military. She seems like that's where she wants to be. She grasps the situation. She obviously has battles within it, but she wants to be in the military. That she knows what she's getting herself into. Exactly.
Yeah, her father's a colonel, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
And
something like that. Or major.
Yeah, and no, she's a major. And,
right.
And he. And she's very traditional, right? Men do this, women do this.
That's right.
That's her sort of attitude. But she starts the show as this pathetic character who defines herself by the men she's with.
Yeah, Houlihan Hot Lips.
Houlihan. Who's an object of sex.
Yes.
And she's not respected.
No.
Mostly, but she's sleeping with a married man.
And she's also bitchy. She comes across as like,
and
the annoying one. Yeah.
Exactly. And then she has sort of this phase 2 where she gets married and she thinks that that's a viable thing. And again, she's still bitchy about it, right? She's horrible. Frank's a piece of shit, but even Hawkeye and BJ defend him in her behavior of how she treats, Frank, who she'd been sleeping with for years. Yeah. In the show, about a year, in terms of the
obviously the
timeline.
Yeah.
And she treats him like shit. Like, she throws in his face the fact that they're married and drives him insane, and he ends up actually going crazy and being sent home, right? But like, fuck him, he's a piece of shit. But the thing is, don't treat unto others, right? So she goes through that phase, and then that starts to break down, and then she gets divorced because her husband on principle betrays her. She calls up to contact his unit one day, and they say, he's gone to San Francisco.
Yep.
Right. When did he get transferred there? The other day. When will he be back? Never. It's permanent. Who the hell requested that?
He did. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And she realizes what's happened, and she goes through this awful divorce, and then she realizes that she's divorced, and she talks to Colonel Potter and says, I've realized, I can essentially marry my work. And at that point, what happens is she doesn't just become like a hyper-focused professional who puts everything else aside. she grows in her compassion, in her ability to connect. She starts to mend with, Hawkeye and BJ and Winchester, and she always loved Sherman Potter, but she gets closer to him, and through that begins to gain respect. In one of my favorite moments in just the whole series, when Hawkeye is meant to be going around giving them injections, and it's like an injection that goes better into your butt, and he's using that as an excuse to see her butt. And she turns around to him and is like, he says like, "Hey, come on, it goes better in the caboose. Like, what do you want from me?" And she turns around and is like, "Respect. That's it. That's all."
Yeah.
I'm just paraphrasing, but she says, "Respect. That's what I want." Just good old fashioned respect. And despite the fact that there's not great continuity in the show and the chronology is all over the place, that is a defining moment in what comes afterwards. That is a defining moment in his relationship with her, because they have a complex relationship. They have an affair a bit earlier in the show, where they sleep together in a moment of terror.
Yeah.
They're being bombed, and they just kind of end up embracing each other, and then what happens? And then they end up pissed at each other, and blah 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 blah. And she comes out as this person who she has a few sort of affairs through the rest of the show. In sort of she hooks up with people, not what she was doing before with Frank. And there are two people who really proposition her of like, choose this or this.
Yeah,
and she's like, I can't. I'm me. I'm this independent woman, and I'm doing my own thing. And the concept of that character in, in the 1950s in the military, and that's from a cultural standpoint, that's a dangerous position for a woman to be in. That's sort of, at that time, that's kind of like, oh, okay, so you'll be a spinster. Got it.
What's a spinster?
Like a woman who's alone forever and is bitter, and
cat lady kind of mentality. That
that's
idea.
What a cat lady is a spinster.
Yeah, right.
It's a really nasty.
It's a derogatory term to someone being single, and assuming that they will be miserable because of it.
Yes. So that's kind of the judgment, I suppose. But there's an episode where she realizes that she could get nurses to do triage to save the doctors. So that the doctors can be moving through OR quicker.
Yeah.
And she invites a general to come and inspect it. And when he gets there, he's like, "Oh, yeah, that's all fine. So, Margaret, when are we..." Because they'd hooked up previously.
I remember this one.
And it's that thing of she stands her ground. There's another time when a guy comes from the US to investigate her for communist things, and is like, "Oh, it's okay, we'll let you off if you sleep with me," basically. And it's that thing of she built herself up into this sexualized character. That's how she saw herself and created her esteem. And then she goes through this painful process of having to
shred those layers back.
To pull it back and get taken seriously by men.
Yeah.
And
which is sad in both ends of that spectrum. The fact that a woman can't be taken seriously if they're promiscuous, and the fact of how much work they have to put into actually pull that kind of ideal back.
Totally.
We saw that in an episode we just saw now, which as a bit of a refresher with the... I mean, this wasn't her specifically talking about what you're saying, but that kind of assault of sexualness towards her as a character, which is...
with the Italian guy.
Yeah.
Very accurately depicted.
Yeah, sure.
And there's tons of some, the Lebanese jokes that are in it. Over the top. But some of them are like, you wouldn't be able to put it in a show now, but it's just... It's an in-the-show offensive, but not actually racist thing. Like, when he says, Winchester says, "Once again, our Arab has led us to a mirage," when Klinger fucks up.
Yeah.
And it's that thing of, that's Winchester being racist. That's not the show being racist. Winchester is a white elitist.
Yeah, that's right.
He
kind of like South Park in that respect. Is like Carmen can say horrible anti-Semitic stuff.
They're not saying it.
That's right.
And it's that there's a part where she, Winchester's sister Honoria, gets engaged to an Italian, and he sends all these letters that are about fucking, you gotta leave, you can't marry this man, blah, 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 going on.
Purity of all.
Yes, exactly. And that is what he's talking about. He's talking about racial purity. And he breaks down later on when he discovers what she's been through. I think he gets a letter from her before his letters arrive, and the relationship's broken up and how she feels about it. And he reflects. I think he sends her an audio tape to say how he's feeling, or a phone call. I can't remember. I think it's an audio tape. But he might be a telegram. Anyway,
I feel like it was a phone call because I feel like it would have had to have beaten the letters that he sent. I feel like that.
I think it was a telegram.
Yeah, which it would have gotten there before the letters.
Telegram is like and off it goes. But the
So no, that's right. Isn't it like please disregard?
Yes, please disregard the letters and And they were written when I was in they were boorish and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about him, is that he does have an ability to reflect and things like that. But the things about the show, there's a real mishmash of that makes you sort of go now, and things that you go, no, that is actually judging of the context of the time. So watching the show, you do need to understand the historical context of everything that's happening. It's set from 1950 to 1953. The show was from 1975 to 86, and so you need to pick through and go. That is what today we would call like stereotyping or racial stereotyping, something like that. That one is them depicting racism.
Yeah.
So there's that sort of thing. But in terms of women, because of the time of when the show was made, the vast majority of it is contextual to the setting of the show, because in 1975, you're already at that point where there were tons of brilliant women, funny women on television with their own.
I was going to say there were always tons of brilliant and funny women not on television. Sorry, I was just being weird because I thought you wouldn't.
Television.
Yeah, of course.
But they were given the not given. They fought particularly in the trails of Lucille Ball, who is just one of my heroes. Through Lucille Ball, you get people like Mary Tyler Moore and I think Rhoda, and I think Rhoda's a spin-off from Mary Tyler Moore, and these independent female, really, I hate to say it's like strong female characters. It's that thing, but you know, people feel like that's a fucking thing that's happened now. I'm like, have you not watched anything?
Yeah.
It's
been fought for a while.
It's been fought for since the fucking cameras came on.
Yeah.
And I think that these brilliant women paved a way that by the 70s, with the cultural movements and things like that, and first wave and second wave feminism, you're really looking at a point where the context is they weren't really that sexist on this show. Not on TV, of course. It was on this show. They were primarily depicting attitudes towards women of the time and of male characters, and that is actually examined throughout the show in numerous parts.
Yeah,
and one of my favorite ones being the episode with Nurse Kelly. Who, again, this is just a weird continuity thing. She's Chinese and then she's Japanese. So once she becomes a featured extra that's in it for basically the whole way through to the end, she's Japanese. But prior to that, someone is asking about a skin graft, and they say, do you have something like, this sort of size? And I think they use the like Italian terminology for like a type of pasta. And she goes, look, I don't know. I'm Chinese. You can either say like dumplings or this or that, and they're sort of like having a cultural conversation to describe skin grafts. Yeah, which is a funny moment. But later on, she's Japanese, right? And the so she's overweight and she's a larger girl, and she is the only nurse basically that hasn't been screwed over by Hawkeye because he's never flirted with her. Basically, every nurse sort of won't really sleep or hang out with Hawkeye anymore because he has commitment problems, which we find out in the show is because of this woman. She shows up in the show. I was very surprised that they did it, actually.
Yeah.
There were allusions to her at different points. And then she comes, and it was the woman, the only love he's ever had. And they broke up, and she left him, I think. And she shows up in the... she's a doctor or nurse in the war, and she shows up there, and... You know, it's this sort of examination of, oh, right. Now I understand why you have such a shit attitude towards women. Aside from the fact his mum died when he was really young. So he has a complicated relationship with women anyway. And he...
Talking about this Japanese character?
Yeah, he sort of has this episode where he keeps not... acknowledging Kelly as a person who has any sexuality to her. And it's that thing of like she wants to be viewed as someone who has sexuality and can be lusted for. And as she says to him, you know, he says, I never saw you that way, and she says, you never saw me at all. And it's this it gives me goosebumps when I think about that episode. It's so fucking great. And he realizes that he should treat her differently, and he goes to take her to a dance and then finds that she's been sleeping with this guy who's, you know, come through the camp and thinks she's really cute and stuff like that. And it's just this isolation of him that grows throughout the show, you know, through, aside from a few sort of examples that specific things are important for emotional beats, Hawkeye doesn't really have any more trysts. You know, he doesn't really sleep with many women for like the last 5 seasons or so. Explicitly because of how he's treated women in the camp. And so as soon as someone arrives, they're like, oh, by the way, don't go near him. And there are comments.
I remember that.
And it's really clever that that's what happens. They're aware of this. It's not it. Those are the things that I love about the show. You know, that they are willing to try and look at things in what at the time was the most earnest and honest way possible. You know, when they made something that today we would look at and go, that's politically incorrect or that's racist or something. That it was not. They were going out with the best intentions within the context of the time. These are the people involved, you know, Alan Alda and all the producers. I mean, these are very left-wing, progressive people. And they always had the best of intentions. And that's one of the things I find interesting about you know, coming back to Margaret with her arc and those changes and how they... despite having in the context of the show all these sort of things that would be talked about her in a sexualized fashion, whoever was writing never lost their respect for her. Whoever was writing never on a long-term basis judged her for her behavior. And that is something that I find really beautiful about the show. Masterfully performed, by the way. The character, she just is a magnificently crafted character, and one of those ones when people are talking about great female characters, I often say, like, have you watched M.A.S.H? And way more than I ever hear the answer yes, people say no, and I go, watch M.A.S.H. Like, Margaret Houlihan is just this incredible character who comes from one place to another place and ends the war in this as just an utterly different person, and not in a way that feels artificial, not in a way that, you know, it seems like an actress, you know, sometimes a character changes and you sort of go, is it because the actor said I don't want to be like this anymore or something. Like,
Yeah.
even if that happened, it feels
gradual.
totally
Natural and
exactly. It feels
organic.
totally natural. And the thing I love about her when she's married is that her overall behavior and thoughts of herself as a woman are no different from how she identified before when she was sleeping with married men. She was defining herself by the men that she's with.
Yeah, she never changed as a person at the core. She's always the same person, but her situation changes over time.
Yeah, in terms of her goodness, she changes at her core when she gets divorced, and she realizes that men are not.
Oh, I was going between the example of her being single and then married.
Yeah,
Not
she
that point of-
she realizes when she gets divorced that she is an autonomous person who gets to decide what defines her, and that's one of my absolute favorite things about the show. Like, just hugely one of my favorite aspects of it, and something that when someone asks, won't shut up about it, and when people don't ask, I won't shut up.
Well, now you have this in a recorded form. So if anyone says, "Oh, I'm not sure about M.A.S.H," you'll be like, "Hey, just listen to this podcast."
No, now I definitely don't want to watch it.
Yeah.
If it's as boring as this guy talking.
And listen to the entire series. It'll be like 500 episodes in, because we'll obviously go over episodes twice. I mean, or what's the point?
There's 11 seasons, and I would have watched it all the way through except for one episode, 2 episodes rather. It got to be about 15 to 20 times.
Jeez.
Over the last 10 plus years.
Yeah, so it's about like almost once a year.
I do try to watch it through once a year, and then depending, I've only ever seen Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen 3 times. Mm-hmm. The last episode.
Yeah.
And I think 4 times I've seen Dreams.
We're gonna watch that episode on this podcast.
I fucking hate it, man. It's just.
Why do you hate it?
Because. So initially I didn't like it because it felt kind of avant-garde or wanky. That's initially why I didn't like it. And then when I watched it again, it did its job. That's why I didn't like it. It made me feel really uncomfortable. Because, so what this episode is everyone is horrendously sleep deprived. And then at different points, they keep just conking out finally and getting some sleep. And they all have really disturbing nightmares that watching them today you might sort of go, oh yeah, but if you are in the midst of their psyche, if you're in their heads of these characters, it exposes you to a weakness, an emotional weakness in them that is very scary, because you finally get to, it's the only time in this show where they go inside their heads to show you what happens in their minds, and that it's not just the conversations or the breakdowns or the gestures or the interactions. It shows you literally what's in their heads, and it varies. Hawkeye being stuck on a paddle boat in a river with no arms as mannequins in separated parts float down a river.
Yeah, that was messed up.
Margaret, is in a wedding dress and kisses a man, and then it cuts, and she's just suddenly covered. Her wedding dress is covered in blood, and I think she starts screaming. And I can't remember what happens to BJ, but Winchester is a magician that is like forced to dance because he's one of the people that has an extremely hard time with the transition of working there. And he is someone who can't allow the vulnerability to be exposed because of the culture he comes from. And that episode ends with basically they all, drink coffee in the mess tent because none of them want to sleep because of the nightmares they've been having.
Yeah.
And that's the whole episode. Like, very little of the episode.
Is that the last episode?
No.
No, I was going to say, I'm like, that does not sound like the last episode. I don't remember.
No. the last episode's fucked up, but
it's powerful.
With the chicken and stuff. It's the last episode is Hawkeye is in a psychological institution,
that's right.
With one of my favorite bit characters.
Do you mean the therapist?
Yeah, whose name amazing. Has just a
Simon
Sidney Friedman.
Yeah.
Dr. Friedman. He's
an
they're on a bus and he's disturbed about the fact that this woman had throttled her chicken to by the way, this is referenced in 30 Rock by Alan Alda.
Oh god, I remember this episode. This was so
he's
good.
He's disturbed by the fact that a woman throttled her chicken so that the North Koreans who were in the bushes wouldn't find them. And once the breakthrough in his therapy is that it wasn't a chicken, he's replaced it in his mind as a chicken, and it was her baby. She smothered her baby who was crying so they wouldn't be found. And that's the final breakdown when he gets sent to a psychiatric ward.
Yeah, he snaps.
Yeah, and that is referenced in 30 Rock when Alan Alda walks into walks into the studio because he is Jack's actual dad.
That's right.
He wants a kidney.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm a kidney. I don't know these words. The other kidney's singing now. But the joke, he walks into the thing and someone is, they're doing a set and there's someone's dressed up as a baby and what's his name? What's his name? The character in it.
Thanks. Tracy Morgan.
Tracy Morgan. So I think he's dressed up as a baby or something. There's a baby on the set in some fashion, and he's screaming, "My chicken! My chicken!" And Alan Alda says, "Crying about a chicken and a baby? I thought this was comedy." And then he walks off.
Futurama did a really good piece on M.A.S.H. And it was like the robots that are doing like M.A.S.H. essentially. And it was just like, it would just always go like something really funny and then it would just cut, like he would just turn his head and it would go all dark and he would say something really horrible, like, because I'm trying to hide my feelings, and he would go back to like this ha 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 joke. And it was like, that's kind of a great way of describing the show.
And that's a really cool way of they sort of got to weave humor in, was that that is Hawkeye's coping mechanism.
Holy punny, Jesus.
Oh
man.
yeah, as long as he's making jokes. He's okay.
I feel like there are like full-time pun writers that just basically went through the script and went, yeah, we can pun this, we can pun this.
In history are in this
only
show.
Because every pun in history is written in that show.
No, these like it's just like boom joke, boom joke.
Yeah, it
boom,
really
joke.
is.
But it's a lot of time it's puns. And
God, we just had cement puns, right?
That's it. I'm thrown in the trowel.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus.
They're just.
I've got a concrete idea. That was the other one. Oh, there's so many of them.
I love that episode so much.
Yeah, it's really good.
It's a great episode. It's, to me, I know it's not, but I file it kind of under the caper episodes where it's like, you know, something silly's happening.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful episode to me because, there's an episode basically called Concrete Relationships where they discover that there's staph infections from the rotten floor in their OR, and it's eventually inevitably going to kill a patient.
Someone, yeah.
And so they decide to pave it with concrete, and they have to do it themselves because the engineers won't. And that's pretty much what the episode's about.
That's right.
But it's just, I love that bit where they realize they've got the mix wrong, and then they're all like, you know what, screw it, let's put the wood back. And Hawkeye just says,
yeah, let's do it, totally. Everyone go to bed right now.
Yeah. And just accept that someone will die.
Yeah.
That's all.
That's all.
And opens the door.
Yeah,
he opens the door for him, and then everyone gets back to work. And
that's the weird thing about that show, is that like if you didn't think of it in that kind of perspective of like, this is messed up and this is like if you didn't get your head in that zone, then it would just be like this, oh, it's a kind of a stupid joke and something like that. But it's like, because he doesn't say it really darkly or seriously. He says it in that kind of sarcastic kind of tone, like kind of more
Let's all
almost
just go
upbeat.
and have a good night, and then we'll do this, and then someone will
Yeah,
die.
that's right.
And that's
But it's
one of the
dark.
yeah. But that's the thing I love about the show is that's the situation that they're in. It doesn't matter if you're joking, it doesn't matter if you're drinking, it doesn't matter if you're smiling, it doesn't matter if you're sad. The fact of the matter is that you have to, until you drop dead, basically, you have to just continue saving children, you know, from his perspective.
Yeah.
From a horrendous situation.
Yeah.
You know,
And if you do fall asleep, people will die. Like, that's just the reality. Like,
Yeah.
they did, like, they do ridiculous hours. Like, there's constant references to doing, like, you know, 18 hours or 22 hours or something like that, where they just...
there's a couple of episodes. I think there's only one episode where it's like over 50 hours or near 50 hours or something like that. And
But the thing is that that's a common theme, not like, oh, this is one episode where they go crazy. It's like,
Yeah.
no, this happens regularly.
they're exhausted
Yeah.
all the time.
Because if they do go to sleep, if they do sleep well, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's that great thing about sort of in the personal life stuff where they're trying to manage their own time, and you know they might do this and have a date with someone or do that, and one of my favorite examples of it is this guy who has an absurdly high death rate in his units, and it's because he wants to
A particular hill that he wants to
yeah,
capture.
he wants to capture a hill, and Hawkeye decides to poison him so that he gets abdominal pains, and then convinces him that it's his kidney.
Yeah.
And BJ tries to talk him out of this, but he takes out this healthy man's kidney. And as BJ says to him, you know, that's not surgery, it's mutilation. And it's a
Yeah.
line, and he won't
Cross it.
have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
You know, and Hawkeye does it, and he stayed up through the night to do the surgery and get him into post-op and do all the stuff, right? Because he had to do everything by himself. And he sits down on his bunk and he's about to go to sleep, and then ambulances arrive.
Yeah.
And BJ says, you know, you treated a symptom, but the disease goes merrily on. And it's that thing of, you didn't do anything.
Yeah.
You know, I can just stop one person, so they'll replace him with another two fucking pieces of shit.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's that's one of my favorite things about that show, is that if they misuse their personal time, you know, then they'll go, and now you have to stay awake for the next 20 hours doing surgery because you didn't sleep when you had the chance.
And people will die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is unfair. That's not living.
No.
You know, they're the Walking Dead in this show. It's such an interesting examination, and it's one of those shows that I often think the only thing that would make it better is if it did have sort of a 21st century current standard Breaking Bad level of continuity and chronology. That could be it's the only thing that would improve it to me. And I think during the Iraq War, there was a suggestion floating around that someone wanted to revive the concept and do it now. I think that would be a bad idea. I think that it would actually be better to revisit exactly the same thing if you were to look into it, because I just think there is something about that it's how do you make this show? How do you make something so nuanced that you can make a comedy that is set in a military hospital in a war zone?
Yeah.
How do you
go 11 seasons? You know, like, there's a lot to talk about, but obviously they do it. I never felt like, other than the first two seasons, which were a bit of like repetitive and a bit of a drag comparatively,
because they're comedy, and it's that like, I get it.
They ended the show, and they could have made more episodes. They probably could have found something to write about, but they didn't beat a dead horse.
Yeah,
they got to it and like, all right, this is the time.
And like I said, the only thing that could have made it better was chronology, and they have some incredible episodes that, you know, violate things that have been set up earlier and all that kind of stuff. But it's when you go into it, you just have to ignore that stuff. You have to just go, I'm going to take this episode by episode and interpret it, in my opinion anyway. I interpret it through this thing of, on one level, I interpret it as like, hey, this is like a 1970s, 1980s show. They didn't do that then. So there you go. In an in-universe way, I interpret it as like they've picked parts from different winters and different summers and different springs throughout the 3 years, and then
to be honest, I don't even think about it. I just go, this is just a war. Like, I understand that it does come from a very specific time, but I just go, this is just a war. Insert war here. I understand that it's not.
I think if you get to the level of like M.A.S.H fandom that I'm at, it's sort of that thing where I can say, like, at this point, she's a Chinese nurse and she's a Chinese nurse, and like they say that this happens, but he didn't. There's an episode that one of my favorite episodes covers a full year, right, and it's done beautifully through a It starts at a New Year's Eve party, but the New Year's Eve party that it starts at was before Potter arrived. And Potter's there. So there's things like that.
Yeah, but they're just short films about a time.
Oh, totally. That's what I mean. Like, it's just things to ignore. But that episode is amazing because, it goes through and then it ends at the next New Year's Eve and they're still there. And it follows this baseball season where Klinger and Winchester lose a shitload of money, and everyone else makes a lot of money, and it follows as Father Mulcahy plants corn, and he's trying to grow them, and he gets them done, and he gets them all ready for 4th of July, and then the cook creams all the corn that he made instead of putting it on the cob, and it's fucking great stuff. But that's one of those episodes where you just go, wow, look at 12 months of what happens to them, and other shows have done that. I'm personally not aware of anything that had done that before, and I'm sure there is. But like, I don't know if you watch Master of None, but that, for instance, did that beautifully with I think it showed 12 months of his relationship with the girl he ends up with.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's kind of just reminded me of it. But yeah, I think that's kind of, in my opinion, a very all over the place, kind of scattered overview of what I think is really great about the show and how to think about it when you watch it. To take it as what it is instead of applying current concepts of television to it, because then you're setting yourself up to fail at absorbing it in a way that's positive. I just think it's one of the most valuable and worthwhile viewing endeavors. I really think that it is a truly uplifting vision into how we should all feel about the reality of what these things, what war does to human beings. And despite the fact that, people talk about justified and unjustified wars and all that kind of stuff, I mean, there was nothing ethically wrong with the Korean War in terms of, the concept of the Korean War. North Korea was like, they wanted to take over the South, and they wanted to be separate places, and it's a completely legitimate thing to go, no, we don't want this, we want to fight to keep Korea whole. And so that's the other layer to it as well, is that it's despite things that happened in the American involvement, it's in that, a bunch of generals wanted to drop nuclear bombs and shit like that on the North.
Jeez.
And yeah, in a very real way. It was very much seriously suggested. And despite all of those types of things, it's still, and despite the fact that they were there, the Americans were really there. If it wasn't about communism, they wouldn't have shown up.
Yeah, of course.
But besides that, the South Koreans were entitled to defending their way of life. Despite the horrible things that happened on the South Korean side of things as well. It's not like everyone was nice.
Yeah.
But even within that context, you can experiment, like, what the fuck is happening here? The madness of it. And that it's always something that's worthwhile investigating. And it's just from a perspective that's not normal. In terms of, war movies, blah, blah. It's always, soldiers or generals or airmen or this or that. I mean,
it's the big drama as well.
Yeah.
It's always like the craziest part of a war, the most intense something.
And this is what happens afterwards.
Yeah.
The guy that you saw get shot in Band of Brothers, let's follow him and see what happens.
Yeah.
And that's what this show is about. And that is a unique thing. And then when you look at the real world side of it, this bizarre concept that, not like reportedly anyway, not many super famous shows seem to go past without drama. And aside from a couple of moments of arrogance and egotistical behavior, specifically in seasons 1, 2, and 3 with people behind the scenes, once they sort of got set into the motions of who was who on set from season 4 onwards, reportedly it was just the most delightful thing to work on. Everyone had a wonderful time working together for 11 years. That's a really
long
huge
time
thing.
Yeah.
And for people like I really am tired. I can't remember the name of the guy who played Frank, and I feel really terrible about that. But for him, in season 5, to turn around to them and say, and this is, I've always had huge amount of respect for him for this. He turned around to the producers and writers and everyone and just said, "What more is Frank? What can you do with Frank? Because you either rip his character apart and totally betray the character he is by changing him to be something that can grow, or he's done." And that's why he left the show. He left the show because he felt that there was nothing that character could grow into, and he was going to become just I'm the bad guy kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he walked away and allowed Frank to not become that. Mm-hmm. And then opened the door to Winchester, who, when they thought about who is Winchester, they went, okay, we need a character that we can have some access of growth in.
Yeah, that's right. They just started him from at the core to be someone that can be changed. And
Exactly.
someone who's confident in themselves, that can stand up to Hawkeye and BJ and all that
And competent.
stuff. Yeah.
He's an arrogant, racist fuckwit.
But he's
But
good
he's
at
a
his
damn
job.
good surgeon.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that's really great about that. Whereas Frank was he wasn't just an arsehole. He was incompetent. He was rude. He was viciously racist in a way that's quite different to the way Winchester was racist. And misogynistic and all these terrible things. Winchester's also misogynistic. But not misogynistic. He's sexist. And okay, this character's expired, I'm leaving. Not, give me more to do.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is why the show is so wonderful when you go back and watch it now, is because behind the scenes, same as when you watch something like Friends, right? Those guys all actually became close and respected each other. And they did things in Friends. I think it was Ross and Rachel, the again, brain has faded. But when their contracts were negotiated for the show going beyond season 2, they found out how much more they were earning than everyone else, and they demanded their salaries be reduced and spread evenly so that everyone got up to the same thing. And they all signed contracts saying from here on out we have to be paid exactly the same, despite the fact that that NBC's perspective on it was,
Ross and Rachel were making the most money.
You guys are the stars.
Yeah, you're
be paid more. So things like that, and you just, I think that's why there's such a beauty to it. And one of my favorite clips that you can find online is of sad. It's so sad that someone at I think it was it on NBC? I think it was on NBC. I can't remember. Whoever was broadcasting M.A.S.H. invited the press to view the last take of the show that was ever done. And the last take of the show that was ever done was the episode before the final episode. It's so great. They make a time capsule. They put all this stuff in there. And it's when they've just buried it and they're about to walk off, and Winchester has a fake grenade and he throws it in the air and catches it and walks off, and that's the final thing that they shot. And the cast was so upset, but you can see this beautiful moment of just as soon as it's cut, they need this time, they're crying and all this sort of stuff, but some idiot at the studio said that the press should be in there to get publicity for it and all this stuff. So when they called print, they were just like, oh, would you like to answer questions about blah, 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 blah? And they didn't get this moment of peace. And it's sad, but in the footage that comes before that happens in their last take, you can see how difficult this last take is. And you can, and despite how phenomenal all these actors are, you can see a bit of it in the episode, but they put it into the moment of thinking about 50 years from now or whatever. But there was a lot of love in the making of it, and I am really happy that Alan Alda managed to wrestle a lot of creative control, because he brought to the forefront of it an examination of things that otherwise wouldn't have happened. He had the power to, in terms of the industry, to be able to dictate a lot of what the show was doing. And through that, he got to examine issues that otherwise wouldn't have been covered, because it would have remained just a comedy when it had the potential to be so much more. And it's rare that you see that potential realized as to its full extent, that M.A.S.H could become truly what it should be and remain exemplary throughout, that it would just be of a high quality. Anyway, sorry, I know you haven't talked much.
No, that's fine. You have a lot to say about it. That's fine. I want to echo a lot of those statements, but probably like a quarter of them. Only
the rest I disagree with.
No, I just don't know a lot of that other stuff. Like, I've seen all the episodes, but I can't make reference to them and all that stuff like that. So yeah, no, that's good. I like this. It's a good intro into like what this, like, if someone wants to hear what you talk about when we go through the episodes, then they'll be able to like refer to this episode and be like, this is kind of the whole overarching. So if you say Houlihan's, like arc, they'll be like, oh, that's because Josh talked about, that whole thing.
That's amazing, because it didn't even really talk about everyone.
No, we didn't, but we don't think we need to. I think that
no, I think that you can. I think that it's a lot easier to grasp, a lot of the supporting characters, Father Mulcahy and things like that. His arcs are the only sort of important moment that he really has as a character.
The question of faith or something like that. Like, I remember that's happened to him, isn't it?
Not quite like that. It's the Patrick Swayze episode, as a matter of fact.
Oh yes, he was in it.
And
he was a soldier, wasn't he?
He was a soldier that has leukemia.
Yeah.
And I believe that that's right. A bishop was coming to the camp. And Father Mulcahy wanted everything just so, and was being very selfish about everyone being organized for this bishop coming to see him do a sermon, and everyone make sure they're on Sunday, blah blah blah, make sure you do this. And this is really this is the real true test of him. He has other tests, but this is the most. This is where he looks at himself and goes, "My God, what did I do?" And he ends up speaking to this, to Patrick Swayze's character, who's been diagnosed with leukemia, as they found in his blood test, and they have to sort of send him, and 1950s, that's basically a death sentence. And he spends the night going from this zone of everything must be ready, everyone get fucking in line, like that type of attitude, to talking through with this 19, 20-year-old about the fact that he's gonna die. And he forgets to finish his sermon, and he's up all night with this guy. And so he just goes and he does the service, and he doesn't have a sermon to say. And what he talks about is his selfishness and reflecting on that. And it's so beautiful. It's beautifully, beautifully done. And there are of course, there are tons of moments with Father Mulcahy, but that is, aside from one other bit that is about his strength of character, because he's brave and he does a lot of amazing things, and one of the strengths of him as a character that I really like is that he's so deeply religious, and yet he accepts the situation that he's in. He accepts that people are sleeping with each other all over the place. He accepts all of that people aren't doing confession and they're not doing certain things.
He goes in without judgment.
Yeah, he respects other religions. There are numerous times when other religions come up, and he tries to handle that in as best his knowledge is of those things. And he's a wonderful character, but again, like, not the same sort of Hawkeye Margaret
Scale
of what they do.
But we'll get to all those things, because we'll dive into those episodes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because I think that'll be nice to go from, like, going through, because we're not going to watch every episode and then do everything, because that'll just be, we could just do an entire separate podcast about it. But I think, what we can do is we can go through every character and pick, like, defining episodes and scatter them across. Like, we can do that kind of theme at some point, because I feel like that's an important way to talk about the show. But we got to end this at some point.
End it.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, and I'm excited to start recording and rewatching all these episodes. It's going to be.
You don't know what you've gotten yourself into.
Oh, man. I'm sure this would be great. I've got a system in my mind already about how this is going to go.
Right.
So we'll stick to that, and I will talk at some point.
I hope so.
I will. No, I will. I've got things to say. We'll discuss details later. So, but thank you for podding with me.
You're welcome for podding with you.
So that's the podcast for today. Stay tuned, as there'll be a new episode released every single Thursday. And to keep up to date, don't forget to subscribe using Podbean or wherever you get your podcasts. On this episode, I want to give a special shout out to Josh yet again for coming back and providing us with his amazing knowledge and brain, especially about this particular TV show. The Not Chilli Podcast is produced and edited by me, Piotr Wasilewski, and the music was sourced from the Filmstro website. Till next week, thank you for listening.